Welcome everybody to our first installment of the Radical Christian Alternative, which has been our class all year long since September. The first installment post Easter. This is a new day, everybody. Easter was last Sunday, we all know, but now we're supposed to do something about Easter. Not supposed to just remember and just think about it and think how lovely that was, but to say now we get down to work. And we are today. Today we have a program, so excited about this, a 3-week series on persons, people on the margins, really. And we've included during this year, let's say the feminine divine. We've talked about people of color and racism. We've explored a lot of ways that we might, in poverty, just thinking through all the weeks we've had classes. All the ways that we can have our Christian faith inform our life and also include the life around us. And what does that mean to be Christian in a day like we live today? Well, today we have a program with Nat Dean, one of our members of our church. Nat Dean. Nat Dean is a person who's been dealing with disabilities and advocacy for years. And one of the people you go to, a go-to person that is in the state. We're so grateful for Nat to be here today. She's formed an organization called Disability Focused Advocacy, Consortium and Mediation, LLC, based on lived experiences. She divides the time between the direct support of individuals and their families while advocating for improved public policy in the area of healthcare, quality of life, and disability rights. And so, let's get going. I think it's time for you to talk now and share with us your experiences and your ideas. Nat, I am so grateful. Nat.
Thank you. Move it into the talking head window. Okay. I'm giving my dog, service dog, some commitments to lay down at my feet. So, welcome to everyone who's on Zoom, in the Zoom room. Sometimes I'm going to use sign language. It's kind of hard to just stop in midstream because it's part of the way that I communicate with the world. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've been here, I think it was about maybe 5 years ago, Barry, I was here.
I think it was, yes, right in this room. Right.
In this room, and on that day I was using my wheels. So I have wheelchair, walker, cane, all kinds of what we call DME or durable medical equipment, and also here have my service dog. And his name is Buddy, and he's my 5th service dog in 36 years, I think. So they don't live as long as we wish that they did. But he's an amazing helper. So one of the things about this session that when I was invited was marginalized populations. You know, we all can be on the margins of population demographics or experience for a variety of different reasons. One of the things that's a little bit harder to say is like disability rights are civil rights. So we're all just what I call tabs, temporarily able-bodied. So the disability experience can be that one day where you can't get out of bed, you can't get through a doorway, you can't understand what someone is saying, you can't quite hear it, you don't understand it. There can be so many different things that are disability, and there can also be so many ways about feeling that, well, I got it wrong, said the wrong thing. There's no wrong thing if we try. If we try to meet someone where they live, if we try to meet them with who they are, that's inclusion. So I just made a couple of notes and I'll skip around a lot, but there's a book that recently came out, and the concept of it is, would you take a pill to not have a disability? I would not take a pill to not have multiple disabilities, because my disability experience is part of what makes me who I am. And I had to learn over many, many years how to wear my scarlet letter D with pride and to see it as a badge of honor, that was a courageous thing to survive that. And it was a courageous thing to begin to believe that I could have value no matter what my differences were. And part of my lived experience was in 1984, I was driving my car to the typesetter to pick up some labels that were typeset to go do my loft to change my clothes to then go put the labels on the wall of the gallery where I was opening a one-person show that night. And I got rear-ended very severely trying to turn into the parking lot of my loft building. And I sustained a traumatic brain injury. And being that it was 1984, they didn't know as much about brain injuries. And what did happen in that accident was that my jaw joints were crushed. And over the ensuing 6 years, my face was reconstructed in 2 major surgeries. I had a lot of back and neck injuries. And they didn't diagnose me with brain injury for 7 years. And what that experience was, well, they're taking a lot of pain medication. Well, you've had a lot of anesthesia. These facial reconstructive surgeries are like 10 hours long. And they happened over the course of 6 years. So for 6 years and 7 years of facial rehab, I had to drink all my food because I didn't have jobs at work. My face had to be rehab. It was just a very difficult experience. Oh, you're not quite getting things because you're in pain. You're not quite getting things for this or this or this. Until one day someone said to me when I was acting out, not doing very well, in the support group for chronic pain. I was new to the group and I really didn't feel included and I was kind of being snarky. And the facilitator took me to someone's office and I was someone like you to be. And I sat down in that office and the person said, has anyone ever said that you might have a TBI? And I said, well, what's a TBI? And it's like, well, it's traumatic brain injury can mean, she started listing different things. And it was literally as if someone turned the light switch on in a dark room. That's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. What does that mean? And the first reaction was like, that's me. And it was an inclusionary moment, but it initiated an enormous amount of grief in me. And I just started weeping. Like, is this what's wrong? Or is this what's right? And it's not about what's wrong or what's right. It's knowledge that gave me kind of fulcrum to find avenues with which to translate my life experience into a world where I didn't fit, and then learn I need to advocate and help myself be able to help others support me and me support them, and how we then get together a little bit differently. Little bumps here in the road. But that experience of lived experience, and it was hard. It completely changed an identity. Like brain injury, does that mean I'm not smart? Does that mean I don't know who I am anymore? Does that mean I am different? Am I this identity label? Or am I still who I am? So it was a very long experience, and I have to say that part of what builds my work today as an advocate and connecting people to resources is how not knowing and not understanding and not trusting and feeling less than instead of more than. It took about 25 years from that 1984 experience to when I experienced enough significant recovery in my brain injury journey to be able to feel that I had a place in the world where what I was living mattered, and then it didn't mean that I was wrong. Well, why I do what I do today is it shouldn't take someone else 25 years to find that place. So, I'm going to bring in a little bit of scripture. A few weeks ago, Pastor Ebert, you were talking about sight being restored in one of the scripture lessons and also the sermon. And sight restored in that part of scripture is, what is sight restored? What is restorative sight? Is it that we're no longer blind, or is it that we see one another in a clearer, more accurate fashion? Because sight may not be, tell me how many flowers are in that vase and what color they are and what kind they are. Would you ask someone to see that if they tell you they don't see, or would you say, there's this wonderful vase and flowers I'm bringing you. The vase is clear glass, it's about 12 inches tall. They're irises, which are purple with a yellow beard, and they are in an arrangement of about a dozen, and they fan out into this beautiful rainbow of purple and yellow. I hope you enjoy them. That's inclusion. Do we really want that sight back? Do I want to take my brain injury lived experience and throw that away and replace it with something else? That lived experience informed a vocabulary of life that I wouldn't trade for anything, because it makes me who I am today. So what does it mean to see? How do we define vision? Is it an experience? Is experience a price that we pay, or is experience an entity that we want to place blame on? Like, this is my brokenness, or this brokenness is what makes me more whole and more inclusive and more diverse in different ways than just others. And then how do we bring that together into not marginalizing one another, but to include one another? When I am with someone who's not excited and we're in a restaurant, I just automatically start reading the menu because I may know them well and leave out all the things that have tomato because they don't eat tomatoes. They're like, get that tomato away from me. And I just start doing it. I don't even skip a beat or go, would you like me to read this to you? I already know if the menu's not in braille, they can't read it. If I'm at an event and there's closed captioning and there's sign language interpreters interpreting, and there's all kinds of wonderful accessibility tools, and then the speaker saying, now we're going to show a video, and the video comes on, and there's music, there's an interpreter citing what they're saying, but there's no audio description of the visuals. So if I'm with my friends that aren't sighted, in the room, which is beige and strong colors and has some purples on the top, and there's a light that's made up, and then there's a group of people sitting in the room with this is that undercurrent of being implicit, the visual information that's part of that video. That's inclusion. It's always going to be perfect. No. Can you name any place or anywhere you go that's perfect in every moment? Maybe that chair is a little bit hard on you. But behind that you're sitting on, maybe it's a little bit hot, maybe it's a little bit too cold, maybe it's too windy, it's too slippery, it's too whatever. It's not going to be perfect all the time. Welcome to real life. That's not what someone is asking for, is that perfection. It's asking for, how can we welcome you into the space? Sight restore has different meanings. So think about those different meanings as not the one only way to see, but there are many ways to understand and be included. So a really important question. I'm asking people often when I'm working with them in health crisis or I really look at advocacy and support as prenatal to post-grade. If you know what's coming, there are some things you can do to prepare. If you are struggling with other things coming up in your pregnancy that may look like disease presentations, it may be temporary, it may be permanent, we don't know. But prenatal planning, post-grade, is let's not kill each other over the silver bracelet, because that's not what this read is about. Grief and loss is also a gain of the beautiful memory of who was there, as opposed to the horrificness of that passing. It's a shift, change. We don't remove their inclusion from our experience when someone leaves this plane or this bodily vessel that no one was serving them. So when I look at a lot of the work I'm doing with people that are struggling through something, I ask, what do you want? And a term that you placed on what you want is honesty, honesty. What do you want? When something, I don't know. It's like, well, we know you don't want this, but out of this that you're experiencing, what do you want? It's okay to say, I don't know, because I don't know is also acknowledging this is new territory. I'm not sure. What does being inclusive or inclusivity mean? What does exclusion mean? We kind of all experience this all of the time in every moment. What we do want is to be free of fear, to not be banished, to not be removed, to not be shut out, to not be measured by the standard of others, but to be measured by the standards that we hold to ourselves. And that is, in so many moments, maybe all we can bring is, I don't know what I want right now. And when they're screaming, I don't know what I want, why did you ask me that? It's like, it's okay to yell at the room. It's okay to rage at the dying of the light, Bill Thomas. What's not okay is to yell at me about what is happening, because I'm bringing to you the option to yell at them. And then to ask, what does that bring you back? And how do I shift and change and translate that to yelling at the world as my vocalization or my outreach to, I need something different that I don't yet know what it is. And how do I look for that? And how do we find that? And how do we as community build that for the people that surround us? And sometimes we will make choices of the people who no longer surround us. Often it's still coming now, but often I have a friend we lost many friends of ours during the AIDS pandemic. He often says the first pandemic, this is the second pandemic in sort of like our life. We look at loss through different lenses, depending on what our lived experience is. And when he says right now, the first pandemic, people who didn't live through the AIDS pandemic look at him and say, what do you mean the first pandemic? He recently was diagnosed with heart failure and has had a lot of cognitive losses or difficulty in comprehending a lot of things, because in just discovering he had heart failure, they discovered he had several mini strokes. When he says first pandemic and it's someone who didn't live through the AIDS pandemic, they don't know what he's talking about. If he says, well, I didn't think I would survive the first pandemic and I survived the second pandemic, and I know that I have to try and help them understand that no one experienced the AIDS crisis as a pandemic, they may identify him as cognitive decline when he doesn't know what he's talking about. That may just be their lack of knowledge about that history that he had as a lived experience. There's a big concept of not being told what is right or what is wrong when one is simply different. And are we broken or are we more whole because of our brokenness? Because when we are broken, we often learn more about what makes us whole. We learn that we come apart into these puzzle pieces. And we know that the way they fit together, we can't force things into, square peg, round hole, or vice versa. But that's not really what it's about. It's creating a combination. And if I move into a space, or I'm entering a space, and someone goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry we don't have this. I'm so sorry that's not here." It's like, well, let me help you learn how to bring that into the space, like closed captioning. Oh, our version of Zoom didn't come with that. It's like, yeah, there is no version of Zoom that doesn't come with that, but let me help you learn how to turn it on. Let me help you know how to move it somewhere else in the screen so it's not blocking your vision. If I'm asking someone to briefly describe the slides, and they're like, well, there's no way to briefly describe the slides. It's like a cup which is holding some water which I'm drinking. That did not take the whole time. There's bullet points which I will read, or next to the bullet points is a beautiful view of a child in a swing in a park on a sunny day. That was not too hard, and it didn't remove all of the presentation time. But the concept is, oh, if I have to describe everything, I'm never going to finish. That maybe that doesn't look like fear. It's fear of doing something differently. So we want to remove divisions, things that divide us from one another. We want to look at what is to belong, because belonging is simply to exist. It can also be to long for something that we can all be part of, to be in community. And in community, we live in unity. We have much more in common to be in conflict with. There's a philosopher, Erving Goffman, who was born in the early 20s, 1920, I think it was 1922, and he's a sociologist, philosopher, psychologist, and he does a lot of research in what we call qualitative research. Not so much quantitative. Quantitative is how many, qualitative is how does it impact. And one of the books that I read that really helped me understand some of the sociology around this is, the title of the book was Stigma, the Management of Spoiled Identity. Stigma can separate us, but stigma can also be amazingly informative. Managing a spoiled identity. That spoiled identity is really beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Spoiled identity is not spoiled unless the community around us creates that sense of my identity has been spoiled. And management is a really interesting term. I often am saying to people around crisis, it's usually when someone finds me, it's crisis level. There's no such thing as crisis management. It's really an oxymoron. There's crisis prevention and crisis intervention. How do we prepare to prevent the worst? No one can prevent everything. That's the beauty of experiential learning, learning by doing. But there's crisis prevention, which is planning. And then there's crisis intervention, which is entering into that crisis, intervening. And within that crisis intervention, we actually are providing crisis prevention strategies. Like now that we're using the wheelchair, let's put in a ramp. We're preventing the inability to enter the room by creating the access to the room. So I have to say crisis management, well, you know, it's already too late, but it's never too late. It's a very interesting book. I think I keep going with when we look at disability and we look at inclusion, everybody has some kind of disability in any moment. It can be how close is the corner of the podium to the corner of the table next to me? Is it too narrow? That can be an access issue. Is it too wide, i.e. I need to be able to touch and hold on to two things at once in order to stay balanced? I like to look at things through the lens of it's not always a problem, but a problem is an opportunity to find a solution. So how do we change the lens we're looking through? And then how do we create an intersectionality on the way that we approach solution-based problem identity? We need to often change the measurement, which for most of us will mean changing the yardstick. We change the measurement by changing the tool with which we provide that measure. Access is equity. Equity is access, and equity is equity, and equity is equality. And equality is not that we are all the same, but it is the loveliness and the beauty of knowing all different. Because if I can bring the ability to paint that painting on the wall, and then someone else can bring the ability to stitch the curtains, and someone else can bring the ability to make fire and light the candles, or to stop the sculpture, or to hang the door within the door frame. That is bringing many, many skill sets to the table. I think one of the harder things for me when I realized that I had a disability and many disabilities, that's always changing, is to not see it as a disadvantage, but to see it as an advantage. And disability, ability, and then labeling. Don't say I'm otherly able. Don't say I'm able-bodied. Don't label me. Let's face it, folks, we're always going to get it wrong multiple times a day. That's one thing we know for sure. So when we're looking at communities, for a long time we were saying people first language. I am a person who is deaf, but within the deaf community, I'm actually auditory processing disorder, not hard of hearing. I'm not deaf, and people who are deaf know right away I'm not part of the deaf community. It's clear as a neon sign. Used to say person first language, person who is deaf, but in deaf culture, if you say person who is deaf, you're not recognizing the culture of deafness. So a deaf person prefers to be deaf person, badge of honor. My scarlet letter badge of honor is I am a deaf person. You call me a person who is deaf, you're saying I'm a person who has something wrong with me. And I go, oh, it's like blind person. At one point, like person who is blind, but blind person who has community. So there's times where you're gonna always get it wrong. But the thing is, if we think it's just wrong and we want to fight about it, we just want to have a fight, and that might be that moment where you're raging at the dying of a life. We're going to be wrong every day. Take the chance to be wrong. It's okay. If someone comes up, ooh, he's working, he said, oh, they're right, he's totally doing this. It's like, he's working. It's like, oh, he's working. Oh, she's being so weird. She don't really kind of dog. Working. And he is almost a perfect copy of the therapy dog at St. Vincent's Hospital. I sometimes say, he's not Rusty. He's not Rusty. He's not Rusty. He's working. He's one dog, one person, service dog. The therapy dog is one person, one dog, many people. And, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, you don't have to be sorry. He's just working. Ignore him. So I'm like trying to keep it light where they're like saying, well, I'm sorry. Like, it's okay. It's okay. I'll always tell you what I need. Because if I don't tell you what I need, how can I expect you to understand what I need or what I want? What we need and what we want might not be the same thing, but that's a navigation we're making on our own, and it's a negotiation. So statistically, 1 in 4 people have some kind of disability. 25 to 28%. That's not exactly a minority. And if you're temporarily able-bodied, guess what? You might be tomorrow and you might not be the next day, but you probably will be someday at some point, somehow, somewhere in some. Yeah. So disability is the only minority group that anyone can join or leave at any moment. But we may only have a modicum of control over when and how that happens and what comes next. It may or may not come equally, no matter what one's social status, economic status, or any other factors. It's just the way it is. Someone's flu for a moment, not being able to get out of bed, is that need to have someone bring them their sustenance and their food. And that moment of being alone that one day may be the worst moment of loneliness or the highest moment of fear. Will this ever end? That morning, hit your thumb with the hammer. It's like, that is your whole world. You don't know when that's going to stop. Sometimes really is you're bleeding out. You've got the artery, but what do we do next? Try to create internal interventions and external interventions. There's a quote I found the other day. He does in Tutu. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. How do we change what that moment is of rescue, of grounding, of air, of access, of inclusion, of swimming, learning to swim? Or are we just throwing it all in there and wondering after we get it, we can just leave? I mean, we did our due diligence. In any practice, there will be tests. That's why we call it a practice. So we'll be ready to meet our challenges when the time comes. And especially in looking at any faith community, whether that's me, myself, and I, and God, or whether that's in the larger group, we need to practice our practice and not practice our patterns. And practicing our patterns keeps us stuck. Practicing our practice allows us to bring the dialogue of what do we do next into the room. So it's we're at like 20 minutes. I thought I'd just open it up to discussion or questions, and there are again no wrong questions.
Well, one of the things that you talked about was language and using language and how you're going to get it wrong. And so when I want to say to anyone, and I'm talking about a group of people who have different abilities or disabilities. Is disabilities a negative word? I don't know what kind of language to use if I'm describing a group of people.
So I think if you're with a group of people, there's no wrong way. There's no wrong way to describe a group of people except, hello, we're here together. Does anyone have a way that they would like to be identified that's may differ from the title of my talk? Because then you're opening up kind of that discussion in the beginning. It's kind of like there's Black, African American, person of color, gay, queer, LGBTQ plus. Oh, you forgot one of the acronyms, just like help me remember to be inclusive, or what is the most comfortable term that the room would like. I think it's hard to get it right all the time because the one thing I can be sure has changed. If we have utilized a term that becomes insulting, we just say, I didn't understand. Help me to understand. A lot of labeling gets kind of tough. I was having a text conversation with someone who serves mostly community people with brain injuries, and I was trying to help them understand their obligation as a provider to provide interpreter services for a potential patient. And she said, well, I can't bill for it. And I said, well, that's right. You can't bill for it. You have to, it's the cost of doing business. If you would offer that service to another person and not to this other person, you have to offer it to all. And she said, well, I'm not, I'm going to use a word I don't like to use. She said, well, I'm not stupid. And I said, in this conversation, being no respect, we're having a professional conversation. We don't use words like that, like the R word. And she said, well, I wasn't saying you were stupid. And I said, well, I didn't say you did, but I'm asking that you not use language of that nature in our conversations because we're having a professional conversation. If we use the word cripple, it doesn't fit that well, but amongst friends, we might say, hey, Crick girls, let's go dancing out tonight. Let's go out dancing tonight. My Crick girls, it's like that's among friends. And that's a different scenario because we're using it as a self-descriptor in a slang kind of way. Whereas we wouldn't use it in a professional setting. Again, mistakes are just mistakes. It doesn't mean that we didn't understand. It may mean that we didn't think about it and created a level of discomfort. So there's kind of like, there's nothing wrong if you're coming to the place. We're going to make mistakes. Saying Indian or saying Native American, East Indian, or it's going to change every day. That's the one thing we can do. That help?
Thank you, that does.
Like when I have some colleagues that say, I have multiple brain injuries. I say, I'm a brain injury survivor. I'm a TBI. Why do you have that? Well, I am a TBI survivor. I have some colleagues that say, I'm a brain injured person. And I'm like, to me, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard, but that's what works for them. I have a colleague who, I will never know what it's like to be born with a disability. I wasn't born with a disability. I acquired disability later in life when I was 28. And then I didn't know what it was for another 7 years. So I can't know what that person's lived experiences when they were born with it. And I have a colleague who's now also a friend, and she uses the word handicap. Because for her, being able to have that word handicap roll off her back like it does, like roll off your back when you're wild with others, when she heard handicap and then felt strong, that strengthened her because she was able to say, you guys include me, I'm on the playground, I'm still, you may pick me last, but I'm still going to be on the team. She refers to herself as handicapped. For me, I say disabled because handicap has a couple of word origins. After World War I, if you couldn't walk, you couldn't see, you held your cap in hand and begged for alms. And that's like all you were, like handicapped, cap in hand, begging. You were used to that, all you can do. There's also handicap in golf where you could get more points and start out ahead of everybody. And that's not, I don't want something new. I just want to be on the field and play the game. It might not hit the ball as far, but hey, I'm going to be on the field. I just want to be included. So, but disabled to me is the moniker that works for me, whereas to her, disability means disability. She's not as able as others. And handicap, that's her badge of honor. For me, disability is my badge of honor. But I don't have the, top fingernails on the chalkboard experience anymore. Why? Because I understand that is her courage word. That is her badge of honor. We're just different. We don't have to be the same. But I will use the terms interchangeably. Because what's comfortable for me may not be comfortable for what do you all earn. Questions?
Nat, thank you for this presentation. And I remember well, your presentation was it 5 years ago.
Maybe it was even longer.
And the way you just gracefully said, and I was in a wheelchair then and then a walker and right now. Could you describe, would you be open to describing those steps of being in wheels or however that's phrased and where you are?
Yeah. So our Governor Michelle Grisham, is short in stature, and I happened to wake up one morning and I couldn't move. What's this? We looked and looked and looked, we couldn't figure out what it was. And but to get around, I need a different mechanism to get around with. And when I showed up at an event, people were like, "What happened?" I said, "Oh, I'm just shorter than you today." and it like lightened the mood because it was what was happening. The tool to get from point A to point B was the wheels. The dog is a tool for helping me notice things I might not otherwise notice. A lot of different things I can't even. It's just so symbiotic, and I can keep saying, "Well, what does it really do for you?" It's like, oh, yeah, a couple hours. I don't even know a lot of the things that the dog does to me, but it was like, I can't move. This is a tool I need. And I remember that my partner at the time, he hated it. He hated the wheelchair. He would like fold it up and throw it in the car and say, "You're gonna break it." He was angry because for him it was like, now you're even more broken than you were. That was not really resenting the tool. It was the fear. What is this going to mean now? How is this going to change the way that we do things? What are we going to lose because of this? Whereas I saw the wheelchair as a support mechanism, help me get from one place to the other. So with the governor, I went to an event and she said, "Oh, what happened?" She did like a whoa. And I said, oh, I'm just shorter today. And she said, no, I'm still shorter than you. I've seen you standing. I'm still shorter than you. And I said, no, I'm shorter than you today. And then she said, she had an aide there. And then she said, oh, we'll take a picture and you'll give me your phone. And I gave the phone to the aide and then the aide took the pictures and she kneeled down. She said, now I am really shorter than you. It was just one of those things where we brought into the experience, like, it's not so bad. And then eventually, over the course of about a year, I was able to start emulating again. And we never did know exactly what it was, but I just saw it as another tool. And yes, it was hard, and yes, it was a little bit scary, but I had a lot of role models around me, and actually lived experience that helped to cushion some of that. It's okay to acknowledge that it was okay for people to say what happened. I had a certain level of responsibility to help provide some care for their concern, but I didn't have the full responsibility to fix what they were feeling when they saw it. And they didn't have the full responsibility to fix what I was experiencing at that moment. And that's just acknowledging our ability and inability, and how beautiful it is that we can express I care enough to see how this may be harder. I also care enough to see how these wheels might make it better. And when someone says, oh, it's just a little step, or gee, we don't have that pool, we don't have that ramp, we don't have the aisle chair on the airplane. If the only way to get in the airplane is someone picks you up and carries you, there's someone who's going to say, you know, because you could have, I made this request in advance and you didn't, you said you had it and then you didn't bring it. That can be a very uncomfortable experience for the person. It can be an uncomfortable experience for the business entity. But if you do need to pick that person up and carry them, you can say, is it all right if I touch your body? Would you, I'd like to put my one arm under your armpits and the other arm below your legs, but is that a comfortable way for me to carry you? Is there a way that you would prefer I try that's different? Or to even, like in a massage therapy appointment, I'm going to place my hand on your shoulder, and then they place it on your shoulder, because it can be frightening, that first touch. That first entree into that sacred space that is someone's body. May I pet your dog? I'm sorry if he's working right now, but maybe when I'm leaving, you can have a love fest with him. Because that's his reward, that we finished our meeting, and then he can say hello. And although that may seem backwards, that's what's going to work with him. Because I need him to be focused on the thing we're doing now, and I need him to have a reward at the end. Delayed gratification can be difficult, but it may be what works best.
Okay, so just a few basic questions and then I'll ask maybe the longer question. So who wrote that book, Stigma, that you mentioned? I would like to read it.
Irving, E-R-V-I-N-G. Goffman, G as in good, O-F-F-M-A-N.
Okay,
And it's not a real super thick book. It's kind of one of the shorter ones. Some of his other books are tomes.
well, that would be a good introduction then.
Yeah,
And then you mentioned a philosopher and then the quote about the spring. You know who made that quote? And then could you mention the philosopher you also?
the philosopher, sociologist, that was Irving Goffman.
Oh, that's also.
And but the quote of there comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. That's Desmond Tutu. D-E-S-M-O-N-D. Tutu, T-U-T-U. Doesn't Tom, you as an umbrella, he isn't Tom, you as an umbrella.
I think that that can be a quote that I share with my friends in Al-Anon. Because so often it seems that the members in their families just keep falling into that river over and over again, and nobody is pinpointing why that is happening. And you also said this too, that people practice their habits, they don't practice what they ought to be practicing.
You know, practicing our patterns and not our practice.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Another way of changing the when we change the measurement, we often have to change the yardstick. You had another?
Oh, yeah, one last question. I think you kind of went over it when she asked, but how do we approach the news of a disability? So say I have a friend one day and a friend has a child, and the friend comes up to me and says, my child has ADHD. Should I not approach that with fear, even though that person may be in a state of fear? Because approaching it from a sense of this is a potential for joy, it's neglecting their feelings, even though I want that kid to experience something other than negativity.
Right, like my child was just diagnosed with ADHD, saying, wow, it must be hard. It's, you know, if we read the, like if we can't see them, we're gonna read it in the tonality. If we can't hear them and we can't see them, their behaviors, and there's a lot of different ways to read it, but to say, that's new news. Is there anything I can do to support you? Or that's news. It must be, I may have questions about that. Are you having questions? Or just say, this is news. I'm processing it. It gives that space. Or thank you for thank you for sharing. Just like, thank you for letting me know. Are there things that we can do together that will support your son, your daughter, your child? Is there something I can, or they say, I just found out that my kid has ADHD. Is there something that I can do to support you and support them? Are there things you'd like me to do in a way I haven't before? Sometimes, oh, is there something you want me to do differently? It's kind of like, now they're outed. Now they're so different than the rest of us, and different can feel, different can be a celebration, different can also be pretty scary or sad. Or if they're coming to you and grieving, it's like, how can I best support you?
It's about meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, meet them where they live. And something that happens a lot when I'm working with people is I'm bringing a lot of resources to them. And I always say, you don't have to write all this down right now, and there are no wrong questions ever. It's not about being right or wrong, it's about collecting information. And it may be a lot of information because the nugget that they need on that day are the ones that they hear or use that day. There's nothing about being able to use that one tool that one day. But there's nothing about not remembering what the other ones were because they weren't the fit for that person in that moment. There's nothing wrong with coming back and asking, what were all those other things you said? But there is sometimes a tendency when I'm working with someone to go into that, grief and loss. There's a lot of grief and loss and change. You can win the lottery and it's hard. There's a lot of hard stuff, and even the beautiful, wonderful things. Art can be good and revealing and empowering and illustrative and colorful, or darkness can be great if you're trying to project a movie that needs a dark room. But there are times where people begin to kill the messenger, which is you described like such a know-it-all. That's not what's happening, but that is what they're experiencing, and I have to back off. I have to remember that one. TMI, too much information at once.
I'm just curious, when I walked in, I thought, well, I guess this is someone who has studied, very completely the ADA documents. I had no idea that you had a disability. So clearly, if you're in a wheelchair, or you have a walker, or you have a cane, or you have an animal, then that was my first clue. There has to be something going on with this woman, or she would not have, a service dog with her. When you were in a wheelchair, did total strangers approach you differently than now? I think that's, if someone has a disability that's not apparent, then it's for them, it feels some way because they can't do what people think they should be able to do. And it's
They
very,
just do it differently.
it's very discomforting though, when you truly can't do something, but you look like you can. And so you end up feeling like you're lazy or you're not willing to do something. When in actuality, it's because if you do that, it will hurt you. People don't get that because I would never know that you had gone through what you've gone through without this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that we all have invisible disabilities. The tomato.
Yeah.
How are you like, is it okay if we just take the tomato off the salad? If they were touching the salad, are you gonna have an anaphylactic shock? I think it's always good to approach every situation as there might be something, and there always is actually going to be something about this person we don't know about. But if we're just afraid to make that, not think of everything that we don't know them yet. And there were times where I needed to use the wheelchair to get from point A to point B, get a stamina issue. And I'm like, get up on the shirt and fold it up, put it in the back, and take it apart, put it back in the car, and the person will be like. And there are people who use wheelchairs part of the time and not other parts of the time. The colleague I mentioned who was born with a disability, she has spina bifida. She has that great name, service dog. It's a mobility dog. She can, when the dame is standing there, she's holding onto the handle on the back of its very well fitted vest, she can walk. When she doesn't have a dog with her, she's using her wheelchair because she has no feeling in her left side. She doesn't look disabled, but she's using the different tools. So there's a lot of tools we use for accessibility. There's a lot of tools we use. What may be obvious to one may not be obvious to another. And that is exactly true in how we approach our practice of faith, our practice of community. You all hear me in adult ed sessions bringing up the Judaic history because there's so many more things I identify in my Judaic history. And then there's also much I identify in all of the other combinations of faith communities that came into the melting pot of my family, which kind of took me everywhere and said, now you pick what works for you. So thankfully that model's been part of my life. Have I struggled with many parts of my identity at many different times in my life? Absolutely. Will I still? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Did I learn from it? Absolutely. Would I choose some of the same things again? Do we all really have that much choice? The choice is what do we do with what we get, as opposed to how do we reduce ourselves because of what we did recently. I think it's all a gift, and some gifts are less welcome, but what I got of some of the less welcome gifts, those were actually some of the most important lessons in my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Applause.